Hello, everybody. I'm Roxana Zidaru from 45north. I studied international relations at CNSPA University, and currently I'm following the master program at the same university named Security and Diplomacy. Today, we will have an interview with Dragoslav Raseta, which is a research analyst at New Third Way, a multidisciplinary organization in Belgrade, with the goal to offer a new approach to political analysis in the era of right and left-wing populism. He has a lot of expertise in Serbian and international politics, and today we will discuss about the political situation in Serbia, especially about the recent elections and the position of Serbia in the context of the war in Ukraine. Welcome, Dragoslav. I'm very pleased to have you here today.
Thank you, Roxana, and thank you, North 45, for inviting me for this conversation.
Okay, I will go right into the topic. Taking into consideration the landslide victory of the incumbent president Aleksandar Vučić in general election on 3rd April with a majority of over 60, the election results actually fulfilled the pollsters' Ipsos and CECIT predictions about the percentage of the incumbent president and his main opponent, Zdravko Ponoš. In this context, what is your opinion about the statement of Zdravko Ponoš made in the night of the election, and I'm quoting, "The elections are the beginning of the end of Aleksandar Vučić"?
Well, I think even though Vučić scored a personal victory, huge, with taking over 60% of the, well, there is some truth to it, as his party, Serbian Progressive Party, or SNS, lost the supermajority that it had for the time of his previous mandate. So there is some truth to it. I think Zdravko Ponoš was mainly aiming that message for the opposition voters to try to keep them united, and also to establish himself as a more of a permanent presence in the Serbian political stage. Because in the recent years we had opposition leaders who were coming and going pretty much very fast after losing elections or failing to establish a permanent base of voters. They were disappearing quite fast from the political stage. So I think it's more optimistic, but there are problems for Aleksandar Vučić in his second mandate compared to his first.
Okay, thank you. The Serbian Progressive Party, SNS, led by Vučić, lost its majority in both the National Assembly of Serbia in the capital of Belgrade and will be forced to enter in coalition with smaller parties. However, the party would again dominate the 250-member assembly alongside with its partner party, the Socialist Party of Serbia, SPS. Do you think that the other parties will change the current political direction of Serbia or not?
Even though SNS suffered a major setback, political direction of Serbia will be chosen by SNS and SNS alone. But the war in Ukraine and further polarization between East and West, between West and Russia, are presenting a major obstacles for the future of the potential Serbian government. So Vučić was in past weeks was mostly focused on lowering the value of stock of his previous coalition partner SPS, mainly trying to push the idea that the spots of prime minister of major important ministries such as foreign affairs, such as finance and energy, will be out of touch of the SPS. So even if they stay in coalition, which is probably possible, Vučić will try to present himself as a more pro-EU than before, and for that he needs a government that is aligned with the European Union and the United States, not with Russia, where SPS is currently the perception of SPS as this major Russian political tool in Serbia.
Okay, I understand that. But the Russian national anthem was played in Belgrade on Monday, as hundreds of Serbians, including senior government officials, assembled for Victory Day, showing the political strain of a country long allied with Moscow, but now trying to join the EU. How do you see Serbia's position in the future of the close relation with Russia, taking into consideration the close relation with Russia and the process of joining the European Union?
It will be hard for Serbia to manage to save and persevere the current situation. As we see, there is some schizophrenic actions of the Serbian government. As you said, the parade on the day of victory was mostly pro-Russian, but the senior government officials were absent. As I said, we had just political actors that are mostly connected with Russia, which Aleksandar Vučić tries to cut off from the future government. But in just the day before, we had a whole Belgrade in the colors of the European Union and Ukraine. So that position, Vučić will try to keep it as he slowly but surely steers the ship away from Russia and towards the EU. I need to remind everyone that Serbia did vote against Russia in the UN, vote in General Assembly, and for the suspending Russia from the United Nations Human Rights Council. So there is a slow and painful, but I think most surely noticeable distance between Belgrade and Moscow.
So President Vučić is now more pro-European, and he's rejecting Russia a little bit now. Is making the distance between Belgrade and yes.
The biggest problem for Vučić is not the retribution that would potentially or eventually come from Moscow, but in the past 20 years, the media and himself, he pushed a strong pro-Russian narrative, trying to consolidate his rule and try to use that narrative to shift the blame for the 90s or some economical problems in Serbia. And now it's getting pretty hard for him to present himself as a pro-EU, pro-USA leader in such a short span of time, because we are barely 2 months into Ukrainian war, and he's trying slowly but surely to present that the pressure is enormous, that he needs to move away from Russia, so he doesn't suffer a major setback in the domestic politics.
So he started the process. He's making steps.
I'm sure it's subtle and it's slow, but it's happening, and we will. I think we will see in the coming weeks or months that the Serbia is moving away from Russia and closer to the European Union.
Thank you. I will go back a little bit to the Kosovo and the general election situation, especially in concerning the general election. Since the Kosovo war, ethnic Serbs were allowed to vote in polling station in Kosovo until this year, when Kosovo's Prime Minister Albin Kurti refused to allow Serbia to organize voting for its presidential and parliamentary elections. How would change the percentages if ethnic Serbs could vote? Could be a different now if ethnic Serbs could vote?
Well, Kosovo Serbs traditionally vote for the party in power because they perceive that if that party loses, it might prove detrimental to their political survival in Kosovo. Vučić has a firm grasp on the all political parties in Kosovo, and mostly all of them, more than 90% of the Kosovo votes for him. So Kurti, with his new plan, managed to throw off Vučić, but the president, as I said, he has a strong grasp in Kosovo, and he managed to transfer most of the Serbs into Serbia proper and make them vote in central Serbia, and then drive them back to Kosovo. So there is some lost votes for sure, but I don't think it was any big number that would swing the vote, swing the elections in any other side. So there was some problems, but I think it didn't help or help the opposition or stop Vučić from still having a majority in National Assembly.
So Vučić would gain the percentages, even if any groups could vote.
Yeah, the major loss was actually to his image as a protector of Serbs, because for the first time the Serbs couldn't vote on the Kosovo proper. So that was the biggest blow, not the couple thousand of votes that he eventually lost.
Okay, thank you. Concerning the war in Ukraine, Serbia did not isolate Russia after its aggression on the Ukraine territory until now. That you said that Vučić is doing steps to the European Union. But how do you think Serbia's EU accession process will develop, taking into consideration the Serbia-Russian friendship until now?
I think it isn't possible for Serbia to have a detente with Moscow and continue to our European path anymore. As we see, the polarization is enormous, and Vučić is trying slowly to shift away from the Moscow influence. But Putin is smartly driving a wedge between Brussels and Belgrade and trying to sabotage any sort of permanent disappearance of Serbia from his sphere of influence. As we know, Serbia is in some ways it's the last fortress of the Russian influence in the Balkans, which gives Putin a plethora of options to destabilize the region or push his own politics. So the Vučić is trying to preserve Serbia economical relationships with Moscow, mostly energy-based stuff. As we know, most of Europe imports Russian oil and gas. So he tries to preserve that in the time of crisis, of course. But politically and economically, Serbia is integrated with the European and NATO nations, and Serbia must remain in the sphere of influence of EU and the NATO nation. There is no other path for us economically or politically.
So do you think that Serbia will become a member of the European Union?
Well, that's a far-fetched question. It's possible in the near future. We need to foresee the government and how real is that movement towards the EU, because Vučić is master manipulator and master of empty rhetorics. So there is a possibility that he moves away from Moscow, but not necessarily move towards the Brussels. So we will need to see what kind of government is forming in the next weeks. But I think in the next couple of years, maybe 5 to 10 years, Serbia will join European Union, as we see the signals from Berlin, from Paris, also going into that direction, that the Western Balkans needs to be integrated to stop further Chinese and Russian influence in this region.
Okay, thank you. I want to propose a scenario for you. If Russian troops will conquer Odessa, they will be closer to Moldavia and Romania. On the other part, in the southwest, is Serbia. In your opinion, taking into consideration Belgrade-Ukraine close relation, now I know that Vučić is trying to make a distance between them. What is the possibility that Serbia will support Russian army on the military level?
I think it's absolutely 0%. Regarding the situation in Ukraine from a military and strategic point of view, I think we can say with a fair share of confidence that Russian forces cannot longer reach or occupy Odessa. And even today, we see that Ukrainian forces are pushing a counteroffensive in the Kharkiv region. But even if the opposite was true and Russians somehow reached and conquered Odessa or were trying to connect with Transnistria and cause some kind of political upheaval in Moldova, there is 0% of chance that Serbia would in any way, shape or form assist Russia, may that be mobilizing its troops or sending ammo and war material, or maybe just like Belarus doing some classic saber rattling. I think there is a zero possibility for that, and we need to remember the Vučić campaign slogan. It was peace, stability, Vučić. He he knows that he needs to stay a factor of stability and peace in the Balkans. And I think even if that situation became true, Vučić would more likely start some process of confidence building with Romania and try to help Romania and present himself as a factor of peace and stability, than in any way, shape, or form try to help Russia.
Thank you. I propose to this scenario because I think every Eastern European country, it's a little bit frightened to be attacked by Russia nowadays. I think about the leaders, the people, everybody, and I want to propose this scenario to you. Also in the media, it's a chaos, and people are frightening more and more every day.
Yeah, that's understandable. As I said, there is pro-Russian sentiment among the citizenry of Serbia, but it isn't aimed at Romania or other Balkan parties. It's product of decade-long influence of Russia and Russian asymmetric warfare in this region. So I don't think there is any chance, and the government and the people that are in power are clearly staying away from any sort of military connection between Serbia and Russia. Even if they weren't, Serbian military isn't in any shape or form capable of conducting such maneuvers. So I think there is absolutely 0% chance of that happening.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you said that, because in the media, they talk about the Vučić and the close relation to Russia, and the fact that he rejected the sanction on Russia, and people are saying that Serbia is pro-Russian, totally pro-Russian, and maybe with this broader and closer vision of you, we could try to combat the disinformation that it is in the media nowadays, especially about the context of war in Ukraine.
Yeah, as I said, Vučić needs to try to balance the things between Russia and EU, but consider economical and political connections between Serbia and EU. There is no path for Serbia to turn new Belarus or something like that. But the populace was fed with disinformation for years, and they kind of expected us to stay closer to Russia than we really are. So we will see in the next, I think, 2 months with the duo of government forming, we will see slow but surely moving away from Russia and Serbia getting closer to you. Even if narrative doesn't change, narrative will probably stay the same about force moving away from Russia, about coercion coming from United States of EU, because there is simply no time, and Vučić doesn't want to spend his political capital sacrificing for perhaps some kind of domestic upheaval in case that pro-Russian parties or pro-Russian structures try to cause some problems, riots in the streets and similar. So it will be slow, painful, and maybe subtle, not so clear to the international community, but the shift away from Russia and Moscow is coming.
Okay, so the solution for this problem, the context about Serbia, that is between the EU and between the Russia, could be the balance between of them.
I don't think that's possible anymore, because in the past 15 years, Serbia's foreign policy was mostly balancing between 4 major actors in the region. That was EU, Russia, China, and the United States. Now, with the development in Ukraine, that Russia is becoming a rogue state. It is being completely isolated from the international community. So there is no possibility for Serbia to stay on that path. But narratively, and as I said, pro-Russian sentiments among the citizenry are strong. So it will take some time for perception to change, but Serbia needs to move, and it will move closer to the EU and the political West. There is time of the balancing, I think, for all nations in our region is over. Simply Serbia, Bulgaria, countries that have traditionally closer relationships to the Moscow will need to shift and will shift closer to the EU.
All right. Thank you so much for this interesting interview. Now we have clear vision about Serbia domestic and foreign policy. And thank you for taking your time to make this meeting with us today.
Thank you once again for inviting me.
Okay, I stopped the recording. Thank you so much for your time and for your responses. Do you want to add something, or I don't know?
I think we managed to cover all the bases and answer all the hot questions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we should be fine.
I choose the hard question to to make some points. Yes.
Well, it's important for the region, especially for Romania as a friendly country of Serbia, to understand how broken and schizophrenic our politics are sometimes. But we pose no threat to the rest of the region. Thank God. But yeah, we'll definitely move. It will be slow and in some kind of sense. It won't happen. It will happen very soon. But we will see. With the forming of the government, we will see pro United States political leaders and to say that kind of wing within the SNS taking a major role in the establishing foreign policy of Serbia. But it will take some time to be perceived as such by the international community.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Once again.
Yes, and we will upload the interview on the channel, and we will notice to you if you want to.
Sure. We will stay in touch, and we will be making some of our events very soon. So I look forward to continuing our cooperation sometime in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you once again. Bye bye.
Bye bye.